Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. I'm glad you've joined me today, and we have a special conversation we're going to be having today, and it's going to be around how and when do you know you need a great mental health therapist. And I've asked Rhonda Thompson, one of my therapists, to join me today, and she's going to share with you a little bit about herself. Rhonda, tell me about yourself. What is your degree and what do you do every day?
Well, I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California.
And so every day you see people like me who come to your office?
I have a private practice, and so I see a whole variety of people. I see couples and individuals and families, and I see them for a wide variety of different reasons.
Well, why would somebody choose to say, I think today I need to see a therapist?
Well, you know what? There could be a lot of different reasons. You could be having a very difficult kind of like, say, for instance, there was a death in your family, and you were really struggling with the sadness and the loss, and you just felt like you needed a place to talk about it, and you couldn't just talk about it with everybody that you met. And
well, and sometimes when you're really sad like that, the rest of the family's like saying, get on with it, get over with it, and you can't make that happen for yourself.
That's right. And you can also get, you know, sometimes friends and family want to be very supportive, but sometimes they will give you advice that isn't really all that helpful. And it can help to talk to a professional to maybe get another perspective, get some new ideas, get something that could help you feel better.
And cope and go, move on.
Exactly.
Other times that I might think about coming to see you.
Yes, well, there are other things too, like maybe you're having difficulty in a relationship. Specifically, the work that I do as a marriage and family therapist is focused on relationships. So you might have a difficulty in a relationship with a spouse, or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or maybe it's a parent-child relationship problem. There's a lot of different ways that things can go wrong in a relationship, and so being able to talk to somebody that's outside of that immediate sort of conflict can be helpful.
It's really helpful because sometimes I had a cousin say something to me one time that was just really cool, and it's meant so much to me. She and her husband were here going to school.
Yes.
They were adults. They've been married a while, and he's going to medical school. So he's very, very focused on school.
Yes.
And she said, you know, if I'd have been a brand new bride, I would have been so disappointed. I don't think I could have stayed with it.
Yes.
But we'd been married a little while, which helped. But she said, you know what we learned to do? We learned to go down to the local restaurant.
Yes.
And it didn't matter what time of night. It didn't matter. We always had enough money for 2 cups of tea. And we went there and talked about our problems because we couldn't talk about them in our house. Because there they sat looking at us. Every place we looked, there was a problem staring us in the face.
Yes.
When we went out to the restaurant, we could converse because you can't cry and you can't scream and you can't melt down in a restaurant.
Yes.
So that was their therapist, I guess.
Right,
but
absolutely.
that's a great time. Even now you're transitioning to a student place and you've not been a student before. And now this shakes the family differently.
Yes. Well, and you know, it's interesting, just going back to your story there, that's a lot of times what my goal is for when I'm working with couples. If I can transition them to the place where they can sit down with each other across the table with 2 cups of tea and have their own conversation, that will be their therapy moving on, that sort of transitioning out. Sometimes people in the beginning can't even do that. They're not at a place where they can even have that conversation across the table with the tea.
Because it's so loaded. There's so many things in my life that, who would have thought they were such loaded topics?
Yes. And in, you know what, in relationships, because you have a lot invested in a relationship. You know, you have a lot of hopes, dreams, fears of what happens if this goes wrong, hurts, and it can be really, really difficult sometimes to navigate that on your own when things go wrong.
So I might come if I was thinking about getting married?
That's a good time to think about.
Because nobody has given me a map yet to be married. I mean, we all watched as Prince William just got married and had the fabulous wedding, but now they have to make a life in a pretty interesting place.
It is. It's all, you know, it's all very romantic when you are, you know, in the midst of all of the wedding planning, and then after that, there's not just you and your spouse. There's also extended family that
Oh yes, who do you go to at Easter and at Christmas and at Mother's Day? That's even been an issue in our families. My kids are starting to date. Now there's more mothers.
That's right.
So where do you go for Mother's Day?
And those are the sorts of things that a lot of times are good to bring up in premarital counseling. It's the sort of subjects that you can actually start talking out through, you know, what your expectations are. Where do we spend the holidays? You know, how do we celebrate? What sorts of, even things like, well, in my family, you know, we only bought 3 presents, you know, and
how
we buy loads.
How do we celebrate? Isn't that just the oddest thing that you think would be a problem? I come from a Christmas Eve family.
Yes.
And my husband's from a Christmas morning family.
Right.
That was not fun to negotiate.
No, because each one of you are holding on tightly and feeling this sense of connection and tradition, and then you feel like a loss if you lose this thing. So it can be, you know, a lot of negotiations.
So when there's a life change, whether that's through death, loss, changing in relationships, friends move and leave.
Yes.
Relationships thrive or die.
Yes.
Those are good times?
Those are good times. There are other things too. Sometimes it's not just relationships. Sometimes it can be more of an individual sort of a thing that's going on. Maybe you're really experiencing a lot of anxiety. Depression and anxiety are the 2 most common sorts of disorders that I work with in the population of people that I see. People tending to, so as an example, anxiety. You know, you may have anxiety about a lot of different things. Right. Sometimes people have phobias. They're afraid to drive, or you know, maybe they feel social anxiety about going out and being with other people, or sometimes after you've just had a baby, you might have feelings of depression or anxiety. You know, here you have this new little baby that you're taking care of.
Oh, you should love it so much.
It's overwhelming, and you're not getting any sleep, which of course, you know, can really affect how we feel about life.
Right.
And so that's another example
of a good time.
Yes.
Well, I know for me, I think I found you after I was looking at my life and I didn't have children at home anymore. Kind of that empty nest. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? Time in my life, and I needed to refocus, and I didn't know how to do that.
And you know what? Sometimes people are looking not so much for a long, heavy sort of therapy kind of encounter. They're looking for someone to be more of a coach. You know,
provide a little objectiveness here.
Right.
Ask a question that you hadn't even thought of yet.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes, sometimes there's a misconception that therapy feels like this very heavy laden kind of a
like
thing.
I'm going to go lay on a sofa, and you're going to dig out all of the stuff that was really ugly in my childhood, and we have to lay that out there.
Yes, and so there can often be that sense of, well, I'm not really sick. I don't really need to go see a therapist, you know, because that has a connotation of being, you know, having extreme difficulty, and so, you know, sometimes people will shy away from it because they feel like you have to be really messed up to go and see a therapist.
So tell me about the different mental health professionals that are there. How would I decide maybe what would be the right thing for me?
Right. Well, in the state of California, there are basically four different disciplines that are licensed to provide psychotherapy. And those are marriage and family therapists, which is my discipline. They are licensed clinical social workers, which are people who have a master's degree in social work, master's or above. You could have a doctorate as well in social work. And so then you would be a licensed clinical social worker.
Often those are in hospitals, aren't they?
Very often they're in hospitals.
Helping families transition their family member home, or finding out what community resources are there for the family, because now grandma had a stroke and we need to find.
And that's actually, that's one of the, that's one of the specialties that they have, that licensed clinical social workers have, which is a focus on, not just the family, but also the larger system, the kind of the community system. And so and they're looking for ways to help people function optimally within their larger system. And they usually have a lot of good resources within the community, although they are also trained to provide psychotherapy. So this is also something that is on that master's level. People who have a degree in, or who are licensed as marriage and family therapists, have also a master's degree either in psychology, counseling psychology, marriage and family therapy. So that's the master's levels. And then you have a psychologist, a clinical psychologist.
I've heard of those.
They have a PhD in clinical or counseling psychology, or it could also be educational psychology, but with an emphasis, if you get licensed as a psychologist, then you have to have a certain amount of hours that you also do practicing psychotherapy.
Okay.
And then they do testing and assessment. So seeking out a psychologist, one example might be if, say for instance, you have a child who's really struggling in school and maybe you are thinking that there might be a learning disorder. You might look for a psychologist who would be able to do the appropriate testing and help advise you with what would be a good placement and diagnose that.
And how to optimize their learning, or how to optimize what you can do at home to support your child. Psychologists
also provide a wide variety of other sorts of testing, but that just happens to be one area where you might look for. Psychologists are also trained to provide psychotherapy.
Okay, so everybody can do a little bit of psychotherapy.
Yes.
And then lastly, there's psychiatrists.
There are psychiatrists.
Now, what's a psychiatrist?
Psychiatrists are medical doctors.
So they're physicians first.
And they're physicians first, and they also are trained to provide psychotherapy, although not so, you don't see that as much anymore. Many psychiatrists are mostly specializing in assessing and prescribing psychotropic medication.
So medications to help balance the brain chemicals that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly, yes.
So they're taking care of more of that medical need that goes along with the brain function and the therapy.
But all of the 4 major disciplines, at least in the state of California, do provide psychotherapy.
So if you don't live in the state of California, then it would be very important for you to learn what kind of licensed therapists are in your area, because lots of people can hang their shingle up and pretend they're somebody, but I wouldn't want to trust my well-being with somebody who pretends.
Yes. So you want to look at the licensing board for any kind of place that is in your state, or if you live in a country other than the United States, you're also going to want to look at what's the background, what are the qualifications, what does this professional have to do in order to say I'm a therapist or I'm a counselor.
Very good.
You want to take a look at that. And then you would also want to ask questions such as, is this person licensed? You know, do they have a license, and is their license in good shape?
Well, one of the things that I know of about having a license, because I have a different license than you do, but having a license means I am held to a certain level of ethics within my community.
Right.
And that's really, really important. You want to make sure that when you're sharing that deepest part of yourself with someone else, that they have an ethical trust to be held with you. They're not going to run out and tell the neighbors or your banker or your pastor that something's happening in your life. It's not. It should be kept in privacy and in confidentiality.
It absolutely should. Yes, and there are in California there are laws that govern that, and that all therapists are required to abide by those laws.
Right.
Now, in addition to that, professionals might also choose to join a professional organization that has their own set of ethical guidelines that they adhere to.
And what might some of those be?
Well, as an example, for me, my association in California is the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and it's CAMFT for short. So if a person were to check with my professional association, they would see that I belong to a professional association and I am in good standing.
And that's important. That's just like you should check out your physician before you go get doctoring. You want to know that the people that you're entrusting yourself to are properly trained and properly governed, so that they are keeping your confidentiality.
You know, California actually makes it pretty easy to do this too, because you can go onto the website, actually, I didn't list this website, but this is the Board of Behavioral Sciences, and you can do a search for a license number or a person's name, and they will tell you just right on the website. It's it's bbs.com. It's www.bbs.gov. G-O-V. I'm sorry, I forgot to give you that website.
We'll put that up on the end of the station, or you can find it on my website at Smart Lifestyle TV. We'll make sure it's there.
So you can do a license check, and you can see if that person has any sort of actions against their license, and that can help you also make an informed decision.
Now, I have a question. This is kind of off of the side. I've been hearing a lot lately about these people called life coaches or goal coaches. Now, are they the same thing?
No, they are not the same thing. They, being a life coach is not a, it's not a licensed profession. So pretty much anybody who wanted to call themselves a life coach would be able to do that. So even if you were looking for a life coach, you would kind of follow the same sort of procedure. You would see if they are associated with any sort of a professional organization that at least certifies life coaches.
It mattered to what you were looking for, because I know some places coaches work with industry, helping people know leadership, or they might be helping you determine some ideas you'd like to have in your own growth and development.
That's right.
But
that's right. And they are a, you know, they are a profession. They are, you know, it's not something that's necessarily all just a fly-by-night sort of a thing.
Right. But
so but they're not psychotherapists.
Correct.
So that's different. They're not one of the core mental health professionals. Although what I will say is that a lot of people within the mental health profession may also offer life coaching services. So these would be people who have a license to practice psychotherapy, but then they also decide to provide coaching services. And if they do, one of the things that you would need to check out for as a consumer is be very clear. Am I agreeing to see this person for therapy, or am I agreeing to see this person for coaching? Because there is a distinction. And you need to know what it is. Be an informed consumer and know what it is that you're signing on for.
Another question for you. Are most pastors therapists?
Not necessarily. Pastors do get some training in providing pastoral counseling, but unless they have gone through, again, I know pastors who have gone through a program for marriage and family therapy and then also have that license as a marriage and family therapist. But unless they specifically have that license, they're not considered a licensed psychotherapist as one of the core disciplines.
And so I think that's really important for our public to know as well, because I know often you trust your pastor. It's probably the first place you're going to go take some troubles to and try to get some advisement from. But then I think it'd be very important to check that and make sure if it's a mental health thing that needs more attention, that you get the right kind of counseling you need. Now, a couple questions. When I start looking for a therapist, how do I even start? I mean, do I just look at the phone book and go, whoa?
You can. And, you know, some people do. Some people start with the phone book and they call some people in the phone book. So that's one way. But there are other ways too. One of the things that you can do is ask family and friends and see if you can get a referral from somebody that that you know and trust.
That's good.
Who could say, yeah, you know what, I do know somebody, and I could offer you this this person's name. In addition to that, if you don't know any family and friends that you want to, you know, if you want to maybe even keep that more private and you're not interested in hitting up your family and friends on that, then another good place to try is your pastor.
They might have a good listing.
Very often, pastors can't handle, you know, doing. Pastors a lot of times get a lot of people that come into their offices and really need some support, and they like to have referral resources to be able to offer for people in the community. Just sometimes also just to maintain those boundaries so that you know not everything about
your parishioner.
Exactly.
Might be nice.
So you can ask your pastor. Another place to ask is at your doctor. Your physician might have some resources. There are some other places to check. A lot of therapists now do have websites, so you could try a search, internet search for therapists in your area. You would Google something like marriage counseling in the city.
And then your town.
Other resources on the internet are, there's a couple in California, for instance. One is counselingcalifornia.com, and that is a list.
That was counselingcalifornia.com. And even if you don't live in California, you can probably look.
Yeah.
Might give you some good ideas.
Another place that's not just specifically located in California is psychologytoday.com, because Psychology Today covers a much wider field. So what you can do there is you can look for a list of therapists, and you can enter parameters of what you're specifically looking for. Someone that has a specialty in your area of what you need. So that's another direction to go.
Now, I have a question. If I call up a therapist and I go in and have one session with them, and it just didn't feel right. I just felt weird the whole time. I mean, they said things or talked about things that just weren't part of who I am, and I didn't connect well. Is it really rude not to go back?
No, it's not. In
so
fact,
it's kind of like a hairdresser. You know, you try and find one till you find one that you really like.
Yes, exactly. And you know, sometimes people feel discouraged because maybe they've tried therapy before and they have just felt like it wasn't really, you know, working for them. Sometimes that really is about the chemistry between you and the therapist. You know, not every person is going to be a good fit for everyone. And I actually really encourage my clients to give me feedback. I encourage them to do their shopping. You know, I've had people call me and I've said, call a few people. Call some different people. It's really okay even if you're calling somebody to say, I'm shopping right now and I'd like to interview a few different people. I'd like to talk to a few different people. But you can get a good idea from asking some questions on the phone before you even meet.
What would be some questions I should ask?
Well, some of the questions that you could ask is, are you licensed? That's a good place to start. Do you have experience with the kind of problem that I am coming in to see you about?
Okay.
Because that can also be something that will differentiate you. You might be calling up a person who really has a lot of experience working with couples, and they're fabulous in that work. But you know, maybe what your problem is that you have a child who is really having anxiety about going to school. And maybe this person is a fabulous couples therapist, but really doesn't have a lot of experience working with children. So you want to ask, how much experience do you have working with the particular issue that I have?
That's a great question.
And then another thing that you could ask as well is, what kind of therapy do you do? You might get sort of a technical answer, so it might be, well, I do cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy, or I do family systems. You might not understand that because it might not be, you know, every particular profession has their own vernacular, their own kind of things that they use and they talk about, but that's a great place to ask questions. So if someone says, well, I essentially do cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a great opening for you to say, well, what exactly is that? And could you explain that to me? What kinds of things could I expect to accomplish with you if I was receiving if we were working with cognitive behavioral therapy? And then that's an opportunity for the therapist to explain to you what's going on. You get an idea of, you know, how comfortable do you feel with this? Does this feel like a good fit for me? Does this person tend to work long-term with people and go back into like issues of childhood, or do they tend to take an approach that's more solution focused, and let's
here today,
let's
and
define the problem and then let's get a solution and let's move on to the next thing. Depending on what your problem is, you might need a longer or shorter course
of therapy.
Yes.
Now, also, it would be important to ask about your insurances, right? Because I think my insurance pays. I have a small copay and it pays, and it's generous. So, do insurances pay everybody, or insurance is a little more selective?
Yeah, insurance is actually a really great question, because insurance is very different depending on who you are and what your plan is, and that's a great place to start. If you know that you have insurance and you think that you want to use insurance to cover to cover a mental health issue, then I would suggest starting by calling your insurance carrier
and see who's on their list.
and ask them. Just say, what are my what's my coverage? Do I have a deductible that I have to meet? Do I have a copay? Is there a limit to how many sessions that I can go? Are there certain professionals that you will cover and others that you won't?
Good questions.
Those are good questions to ask. Another good question with your insurance company is, are there certain conditions that you will treat and others that you won't cover? Because, for instance, a lot of insurance companies won't cover marital therapy.
Okay.
They'll cover if you have an anxiety disorder that's diagnosable, they will cover that. But they're not necessarily just going to say, well, I need premarital counseling. They'll say, no, we're not going to cover that. So you kind of have to check and see what are the different things that I can get covered with my insurance.
So a couple of things I have to think of then is what am I wanting? How do I call up? And then when I go there, I better have clear in my mind a couple of goals. So if I come to a therapist, are you pretty effective?
Therapy is actually very effective, and there have been some outcome studies that have demonstrated that most people who go through to therapy, if they have a good relationship with their therapist and they feel confident about that relationship, that's probably the #1 thing that determines whether it's going to be a positive outcome or not. You have to feel really comfortable with the person that you're working with. But when that is in place, therapy can be very effective.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation today. I've really appreciated the fact that we have discovered, one, if I'm having a challenge in my life, I'm having difficulty, I need to honor that, and I need to go find someone who can help me. We now talked about the kind of therapists I could go find. I can find licensed people. There are honest, licensed, well-qualified people to help me in a whole variety of problems. I can also go and find out what my insurance will pay. And that's really important because we have to watch where our dollars go, and we want to use them as wisely as possible.
And remember, you're in charge.
And I'm in charge, so I only go to a place that makes me pretty much happy, where I'm moving on towards my goals.
That's right.
Well, this has been delightful. I hope it's helped you. I hope that you will seek the kind of help that you would like. That you find yourself in a difficult situation, make sure you're getting help for yourself. And so in the meantime, until we talk again, be happy, live well, and just enjoy your life. So that was just so helpful.
Well, that actually went a little faster than I expected. I thought, how are we going to come?